Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you well. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good.
So how's it going?
Really good. At the parents' house right now for 4th of July hangout, and I guess we're going to be having some hot dogs in a few hours. So pool and hot
Cool.
dogs. Looking
Cool.
forward to it. How about you?
Yeah, my parents are visiting for 4th of July from Pennsylvania, so
Oh man, wow. Where are you located?
Minnesota.
All right. Yeah. My grandparents are from Pennsylvania. So
Cool. One question about atheism. Do you not consider people like Anthony Flew and Michael Martin to be peer-reviewed definitions?
I know Michael Martin has advocated defining atheism as a lack of belief, but he acknowledged in the Cambridge Companion to Atheism that that's not how it's defined. Same thing for Anthony Flew. He wanted to try to advance the idea of it being a lack of belief, but it never went through. It never took hold. So, and they both believe God does not exist. Typically, in my experience, what happens, and this, I believe that it was Matt Dillahunty even that really popularized this in the YouTube realm, of namely defining atheism as a mere lack of belief. I think it was a rhetorical strategy, so that they who have a belief that God does not exist would nevertheless not need to really talk about that belief or justify that belief. The implicit strategy would be, hey, I want you to see if you can make a case for God, and if you can't, then atheism wins. And really all that won would have been agnosticism, but because of the wordplay, you can kind of think, wait a second, maybe like belief in God's non-existence has become justified because the theist couldn't make a good case. So I actually think that it originates in sort of an underhanded rhetorical strategy, and that's what's kind of going on today in a lot of the new atheist thinking. That's my opinion anyways.
From my perspective, I think it originated with at least Charles Bradlaugh, which was about the same time as Huxley when he created the term agnosticism.
Oh,
So I think
hold on, you're cutting out. Sorry,
oh,
you're cutting out.
darn it.
Okay,
Is
you're
that
back.
all right? I think
Did you
that
hear?
I did. Where
Okay,
you
cool.
believe that atheism originates with Matt Dillahunty,
No, 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 no.
or
I'm saying I think.
the way he uses it originates with him as a way to try and skirt the burden of proof. I think was the main point you were getting at.
No, it predates him. I think Anthony Flew might have been the first and I'm sure it predated him, but I know he published on it. Matt Dillahunty is far, far later, but I think he popularized it in sort of the internet atheist community. And I could be wrong about that. That's been my impression as I looked into it a little bit.
Well, I know of at least one guy where it came earlier from Charles Bradlaugh, who used atheism in the same sense as a lack of belief in the early 1800s, I believe.
Oh, cool. Well, then I'll certainly have to check that out if he published anything and circulated it.
Absolutely,
I know when I looked into it, I came across Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew is, I guess, at least most popularly associated in academia from my reading with that understanding of the term. But if I'm mistaken on where it first started, which by the way I guess I didn't have a firm belief was Anthony. I just thought he was a popular one. But cool.
Yeah, I'll send you the quote I have from him, and you can check it out.
Okay. Yeah.
So to jump into the main point, I'm an atheist, by which I mean I don't believe there is any evidence or arguments that indicate the existence of a God. Do you believe that there is such evidence and arguments? If so, can you give me an example, and I'll tell you why I don't think it's evidence, and then I'd just like to hear your thoughts on my position.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool conversation. I like to have it. Yes, of course I do believe, as I'm sure you know, that there's evidence for God. I doubt I'd be able to list off all of the evidences. I think there's a ton of them, and you can see some of them on my website, beliefmap.org. I'll go through a bunch of them there, and there's a lot more that I don't even list. Even my favorite ones I don't list, just because some of them are a little more complex. But for a good conversation, I think the fine-tuning arguments are a really fun one to start with and can be kind of grasped pretty quickly.
Okay, you want to just do a basic outline?
Yeah. All right, so here's the gist. We're going to use a term, a technical term. The term is fine-tuning. And by this term, we don't mean to trivially entail or imply that there is a fine-tuner. We're using a neutral understanding of the definition here of fine-tuning. What we mean by fine-tuning is that they're particularly the fine-tuning of physics. So we're not talking about, for instance, the ostensible fine-tuning of the planet Earth to permit life. Typically, those are going to have responses like, well, evolution can explain how we came to fit the planet Earth and not vice versa. And there's a debate there, but we're talking here about global fine-tuning, particularly the fine-tuning of the constants of nature
You
to
mean
allow for life.
universal fine-tuning?
Correct. Well, it's called global fine-tuning in, I guess, the fine-tuning literature, but as opposed to local fine-tuning. So local fine-tuning is the technical term for, biological fine-tuning arguments or planet Earth fine-tuning arguments, and then they use the term as a technical term. But yeah, so we're focusing on the universe as a whole, and we're noticing that the way the universe operates and the way that it originated looks to the laws of physics and these constants that seem to just be built into it, things like the gravitational constant. And essentially, if you modify these constants ever so slightly, you're going to have a universe that would not permit life of any kind, not just carbon-based life or silicone-based life, but life of any kind. So the argument goes. And so I wanted to define fine-tuning to set a formalization of the argument up. And for that definition of fine-tuning, I want to say that there are a range of values that a constant could take. And that constant is fine-tuned just in case it falls within a particularly narrow range. And so it would be a lot like the quintessential dartboard illustration where there's a bullseye and a lot of places that are outside of the bullseye. And we're saying it's fine-tuned for life if it falls within a dart on a bullseye situation. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And do you see it doesn't trivially entail that there is some kind of designer or fine-tuner? This is a term that is used by atheist physicists all the time. Does that make sense?
Sure. I usually hear it referred to as apparent fine-tuning, though.
Yeah. Well, I haven't heard. I mean, I'm sure that one pops up as well. But all I can say is that non-theists will constantly talk about the fine-tuning of the universe, but it's very clear from the way that they write that they're not implying that it's some kind of engineering notion of fine-tuning. They'll say it's fine-tuned in the sense of if you had modified it ever so slightly, it wouldn't permit the life that it's allegedly fine-tuned to.
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't allow the life as we know it, but it could possibly produce other kinds of life that we can't even imagine or something. Maybe there's a non-physical kind of life that doesn't even need the laws of physics.
Okay, so what if we, in Collins's presentation of the argument, he's wanting to focus, which I follow, by the way, he's wanting to focus on...
Is this Robin Collins?
That's right, very good. He's wanting to focus on moral embodied agents when he makes his argument. And typically when we use the word life anyways, I think that's probably what jumps to mind. But the way you'd frame the argument, now that you have the term fine-tuning out there, as I recall, is something like this. The likelihood of there being a life-permitting universe on the hypothesis of on the atheistic single universe hypothesis is very, very low. One in a very, very, very large number. Whereas the likelihood of observing or finding that there is, that the likelihood of a life-permitting universe on the hypothesis of theism is not very, very, very low. And when you compare those two likelihoods, you find that the life-permitting nature of the universe seems to fit. It's a lot more sensible, a lot less surprising on the hypothesis of theism than on the hypothesis of the single universe atheism hypothesis.
Okay,
Yeah.
so from my perspective, I would say it could be design, and maybe under the design hypothesis, our kind of universe is likely, but it could also be random chance or necessity that could also explain that. For example, from the random chance argument, I would go with the physicist Victor Stinger, who pointed out that even though if we change one constant, it may produce a non-life permitting universe. If we change multiple congruent constants, it can result in infinitely many possible combinations of constants that'll result in a life permitting universe. So maybe the chances aren't really like a bullseye on a dartboard. Maybe it's more like a 50-50. We just don't know it yet. Or it could be the argument from necessity, which was argued by Stephen Hawking as a result of Steven Weinberg's discovery that the weak and the electromagnetic force are interconnected. All of the determining forces in physics could be interconnected in a way we just haven't discovered yet. And so a life-permitting universe is really the only kind that could happen. So either chance, necessity, or design could all explain the fine-tuning. What is it that indicates design?
Yeah. Well, let's look at those alternatives. Which one should we start with?
Go with whichever one you want.
Okay. Well, so focusing first on this necessity idea, what do you do with the objection that this would just kick the fine tuning up a level in this way? Suppose that we, for instance, observe that the night sky had stars which seemed to spell out the first chapter of Genesis. And our telescopes just were pointed in the right direction. Finally, we see this, and there's at least on the surface kind of argument that this was designed. The whole first chapter of Genesis, or some message that would, fit suspiciously well on the God hypothesis, and written in English, with, King James Version font or something, make it ridiculous. Suppose we found that. And we made a similar type of argument. Hey, this seems to fit really well on the design hypothesis or the theistic hypothesis more generally, but it's really surprising on competing hypotheses. And then you came back and said, well, no, it's not necessarily competing because it could be necessitated that this message is there. Maybe as we learn more about physics, we'll just find out that the underlying meta law entailed that this message would eventually show up. And of course, the implication here, the response is that, well, that would just push the fine tuning up to the meta law. What have you thought about that?
Well, yeah, I'd have two responses. The first is that if there was a language in English written in the stars, that would probably indicate, since we already have examples of English and we know who designed English, humans, and we know who designed books in the Bible, which I would say would also be humans, we can probably infer that, yes, that is probably design, since we already have examples of the same kind of design. Whereas I don't think we have any other examples of the kind of design of the universe that you seem to be talking about. And my second response would be, just as you could say that there is a fundamental metaphysical theory of everything that is theism, I could say the same thing and just change it to naturalistic pantheism and say that this fine-tuning is a result of the super law of nature that is eternal and all-powerful pantheism, naturalistic pantheism.
You'll have to elaborate on that second one, but focusing on the first, I got you saying, okay, I understand you to be saying, okay, so because it seems to resemble human language, at least, we don't want to make any presuppositions, because theoretically in the example here, we're dealing with something that was in existence prior to the arrival of humans. So it's just markings, but it certainly resembles human language. And that, what I understood you to be saying is, okay, yeah, so we have a clear case of what appears to be design. Did I hear you right on that?
I think I'd have to think about it more. If we saw just the text of Genesis just appear in the sky one night, I mean, that would probably be designed, because we know of English. We know where English was designed from. If it just existed and we just discovered it tomorrow and it was supposedly been there for who knows how many years, I'd probably say, yes, that's still an indicative of design, but probably not of an all-powerful creator. It's just something powerful enough to create that combination of stars.
Okay. Well, that's close enough. So let's say that's the conclusion you wanted to reach. And I said, well, wait a second. Why don't we just say that it was necessitated? You don't really have much of a design argument there. It was just necessitated. It was there's an underlying physical law that ultimately determined the other laws that ultimately determined that things would evolve this way. And so you don't have an argument for design there.
Well, I would make the comparison. We know what that kind of design is, and we know who designs it and how they design it. And so it's a known kind of design that we already have evidence for. So we can make a comparison to design because we already have examples of that kind of design.
Okay, so you want to say that you recognize design through analogy? Is that what you're saying?
Sort of, I guess. I mean, if we see the letters and it is literally the language English and the exact letters of the I forget what you said, whichever Bible passage, then that is exactly the same as the English language and the Bible passages we have. That's pretty good evidence of, like if we found a water bottle floating in space, even if it was a million light years away, we'd say, yeah, that was probably designed because it's a lot like our water bottles.
Okay. And so, but relating this to your objection, the original objection was, as I understand it, that, well, wait a second, I can just say that this was necessitated, right? Because if it was necessitated, and then there's no room necessarily for design here. Like necessitation can tell the whole story all on its own. That was the objection, right?
Yep, I see what you're saying. So the water bottle, if we see a water bottle floating in space, because we have examples of water bottles on Earth that we know are designed and how they are designed, it is more likely that the water bottle we found in space, we can infer that to be designed, opposed to having come about by random chance or necessity. But if we just see some random combination of things floating around in space that seem improbable, we'd have nothing to compare it to in our known kinds of design, there is no reason to think that that was produced by design rather than random chance or necessity.
So here's where I'm getting confused, I guess. You remember the original presentation of the fine-tuning argument, and then you came back and you said something along the lines of, well, it could be explained in terms of necessity, and so there was a decoupling of laws in the first moments of the Big Bang, for instance. And if we trace our way back, we could find out, and in fact, the laws as we know them couldn't have been different, and nor could the constants, in which case that would wipe away the surprise that we have that the universe is life permitting. That was the objection, right?
Yep.
Okay. And then I came back and I said, okay, interesting, right. So I've thought about this before, and my objection is that it seems to me that in such a situation, we're pushing the design up a level. We're kicking it upstairs. We're moving it like the proverbial ruck in the carpet. And we're moving it upstairs to this meta law that I guess determined that that things would unravel in this way. And to illustrate that, what I said was just imagine that we reached this situation where we had what looked like a message in the stars. You could run the same exact objection that, well, hey, maybe when we learn about the laws of physics, we'll find out that this was just necessitated. And in my mind, this is analogous. And then what you're telling me at this point is that is basically, well, actually, I had a problem with the notion of design in the first place. I don't think that fine-tuning fits better on theism to begin with. It's not the kind of thing that would make sense on theism to begin with.
I think I'm getting lost. I think I'm getting lost between the objection, the infinite regress objection, and your analogy. I don't think I see the connection between the two. So I'm trying to address them as separate arguments. Like if we address the infinite regress argument on its own, it could be the case that the super law may itself be designed or not. I'm just going to say it's a philosophical primitive. It's an absolute, eternal, all-powerful thing, just as a theist would say a god is, and I'm going to label that naturalistic pantheism. And so the infinite regress stops because this is a non-designed thing.
I have an idea. Let's address this one premise at a time. And that way I think it'll avoid the mix-up that I suspect might be going on. We're going to take this in two stages. First, we're going to get a rough likelihood that we would observe a life-permitting universe on the hypothesis of atheism, or naturalistic single universe hypothesis. And then we can try to think about the likelihood on a theistic hypothesis. How does that sound?
All right.
Okay. And okay, so in thinking, what is the likelihood that we would encounter this observation that the universe is life permitting on the hypothesis of atheism? And we're not assuming that we exist here, so we can be surprised that we exist just fine. Do you have a rough likelihood in your mind? Do you think that the modern deliverances of science regarding fine tuning would lead you to think that it's really, really unlikely that the universe would be life permitting?
No, I think it tells us absolutely nothing about whether or not the universe that would be created would be highly likely to have life or very unlikely to have life, or if there's a 50-50.
Can you say that again?
I see absolutely nothing that tells us whether or not it's going to be life will be highly probable, highly improbable, or exactly 50-50.
I apologize. I apologize. You cut out again.
Oh my God. Okay, so I think there's no way to tell.
Okay.
It could be highly likely, it could be highly unlikely, it could be the exact same.
Okay. And so when I come back and I say, hey, look at these interesting deliverances of contemporary science, for instance, the cosmological constant is allegedly, physicists seem to agree on, fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. So if you're off by 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, 120 zeros, then you get a universe that either expands so rapidly that you only ever get hydrogen and helium, or it collapses instantly, and of course you can't get life in that situation either. So here's a reason to think, on the face of it, that we got really lucky. So the likelihood that the universe would be life permitting is in fact very low. This is something surprising to observe in light of this knowledge of the cosmological constant. And you come back and you say what?
I would say that's only given our current understanding of science so far, and if you're going to assert anything beyond that, like a designer, then I can assert something beyond that, like a super law that ties everything together.
Okay, and I'm not going to, I think in your mind you have a way that I'm presenting this argument, and that's why you responded the way you did, but I don't think it applies to the form of argument I'm presenting. So, because I'm not just saying, oh, so it must be God. I'm using a standard sort of Bayesian approach to what evidence is, and in doing that, I'm taking the standard approach of finding out first what's the probability of hypothesis 1, second what's the probability of hypothesis 2, and then I'm comparing those. And essentially, if the piece of data we're looking at fits better on hypothesis 1 than it does on hypothesis 2, then that's just what it means in Bayesian understanding for it to count as evidence for hypothesis 1 over hypothesis 2. And that's all we're doing is we're getting a number for both. Does that make sense?
Yep. From my understanding, Bayesian epistemology has a big problem known as the problem of the priors, which means you can pretty much set up whatever prior probabilities you want for any reason you want. For example, I can say every time someone imagines a unicorn, it adds to the probability that unicorns exist, even though there's clearly no connection between those two things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I can put forward a model that deals with the problem of priors, which would deviate from where we're going right now. So I mean, it's certainly a different direction. But instead, you don't have to buy into the whole Bayesian program to acknowledge that this is a good understanding of what evidence is. So you can think that, look at this, if we have these fingerprints that, on the murder weapon that match John's fingerprints, I'm not saying they are John's fingerprints, but if they match John's fingerprints, we can give a sort of a probabilistic understanding of why we might take that to be evidence for John's being the murderer. Because the likelihood of finding this pattern on the gun or the murder weapon, if he's innocent, is a lot lower than it would have been that we'd find this fingerprint if he was guilty. So you don't have to buy into the whole Bayesian program to be down with that understanding of evidence, right?
Sure. My objection is that you're trying to compare a low probability as if it indicates design, and I don't see low probability has anything to do with design at all. It's like me imagining a unicorn being evidence of there actually being unicorns.
No. It has to be 2 part. Oh, sorry, you cut out again, so I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead. What'd you say?
Sorry, I thought you had stopped talking, but it looked like you had cut out. Good. Can you say that again?
I don't think that low probability is not indicative of a designer. Like me imagining a unicorn is not indicative of unicorns.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. That's why whenever using this formulation, you have to take into account two probabilities, right? That's what I've been trying to say from the get-go. You can't. It's not enough to say that X is improbable. You also if you want to say that some piece of data is evidence for hypothesis one over hypothesis two, you have two jobs. You have the job of determining the probability of the observation on hypothesis one, and then you have to determine the likelihood on its negation or hypothesis two. So I agree with you.
So my question would be, how does improbability of something indicate a designer at all? How do those two connect?
It doesn't by itself. It's two parts. It's one saying, if it's true that a life-permitting universe is improbable on hypothesis one, but it's not improbable on hypothesis two, then that's not to say that hypothesis two is true. But it does indicate that the evidence fits better on hypothesis two, and it counts as evidence for hypothesis two. That's all.
Fully with you. I totally agree. My question is you're saying that a life-permitting universe is in some sense indicative of theism or a designer.
I mean, I guess when you say in some sense, that's the conclusion of acquiring those two probabilities and finding that a life-permitting universe is more probable on theism than the alternative.
So you are asserting a theistic being, this all-powerful being, and saying if this being exists, then a life-permitting universe is more likely. Is that right?
Yeah, if a theistic being existed, right, then correct.
So my objection is if a naturalistic, pantheistic super law exists, then our universe also is equally as likely.
Excellent. So it's not that, dude, the point isn't necessarily that it's equally as likely, but yeah, you could, for instance, conjure up some completely ad hoc hypothesis, and it could equally likely predict the fine-tuning, or better put, it would fit just as well given the evidence.
Not just one. There's infinitely many you can make up and make the same prediction.
Right, really well. And so that's why you can't say that, oh, therefore, the conclusion is that it's theist. You also have to analyze the prior probability of the hypothesis in question. But, and I don't know if you'd say this is controversial or not, most, I think, are going to say that the prior probability of theism is far, far, far higher than a naturalistic pantheistic hypothesis, which is probably going to end up being ill-defined in the first place. I mean, so that's just like, hey, we need to analyze the merits of these two hypotheses and their background probability. And so even if they have identical evidence in this one particular case, the naturalistic pantheistic hypothesis is doomed because it has such a ridiculously low prior probability.
Well, that's my main argument, is that the prior probabilities, as you put it, are the exact same on both, and not just for these two, but for all of the infinitely many we can make up.
You cut out. Sorry, say that again.
So my argument is the prior probabilities for any of these are the same.
For theism and for naturalistic pantheistic hypothesis?
And all the infinitely others we can make up.
Okay. Man, okay, so there's a lot of directions we can go. We can either, one, talk about prior probability of hypotheses. We can talk about the fine-tuning argument, in which case we'd be focusing on these two different parts of the question, namely what's the likelihood on theism and what's the likelihood on alternative competing hypotheses. And that would be enough to get us evidence for theism. And then subsequently we'd have to address, oh, well, it can get us evidence for theism, but it can also get us evidence for like completely ad hoc made up, here, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to invent a particular kind of God. We're going to call him Z. And Z wants to fine-tune the cosmological constant to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. I'm just stipulating that about Z. Well, now that we come along and we find that the cosmological constant is fine-tuned to precisely that amount, ends up being phenomenal evidence for Z, But the likelihood, I mean, when you think about Z versus, I mean, Z could have had no thoughts about a cosmological constant, or it could have attributed or have valued any other cosmological constant whatsoever. The likelihood of just that particular Z hypothesis being true is 1 over an insanely large number, right? So anyways, long story short, I don't think God's anything like that. I think God existed long before the fine-tuning data came to view, and it was a surprising and interesting discovery that confirmed something that already existed, elegantly so. But anyways, you can pick where we go, because we've got a lot of directions at that point.
All right, so my position is that all of the arguments and evidence that you present for theism work equally as well for naturalistic pantheism and any of them. So just pick whatever you think indicates theism more so than pantheism.
Okay, so can you, I guess, we're going to set aside the fine-tuning evidence right now, because I guess even if we acquire evidence, you're going to think that the prior probability of theism is so low that it doesn't matter anyways. So let's look at this. Let's think about the prior probability of theism. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay. Tell me about the naturalistic pantheistic view. What is that?
Eternal, all-powerful universe.
Eternal, all-powerful. What do you mean by all-powerful universe?
Essentially just using the words theists use to describe God and just replacing them and putting them in pantheism just without the consciousness.
I think that if you're going to use a theistic understanding of all-powerful, you might be in danger of presupposing consciousness, because it might be defined something along the lines of being able to enact whatever is willed.
You can just arbitrarily say it as ability to infinitely enact infinitely many things or something.
Ability to enact infinitely many things?
Something like that. I'm just making stuff up off the top of my head. Doesn't really happen.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if that, I think we can just get rid of all-powerful, because I don't know if that's very informative, but an eternal universe that can enact infinitely many things.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so I guess in analyzing what's the prior probability of this, it first needs to be logically coherent. So I'm going to have questions about the coherence of an infinite regress would be one issue. Is this a necessary eternal universe?
What I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you, how does God solve that? Then I'm going to plagiarize your answer and apply it to pantheism.
Okay. So real quick though, on that second question, would you, if I want to say that God is a necessary being, you want to say that the eternal universe is necessary?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Okay. So the idea is that it would be necessary there. Okay, and as the eternal universe, we have, I think, we have like 17 fundamental particles, right? With their very unique properties and interactions, their weights, or their mass, and spin and so forth. So you want to say that all of that's necessary, philosophically necessary? Because that's what the universe is. That's what the universe is made of. Is space and that matter.
Yes, but the super law of nature may not only produce.
What?
The super law of nature may have produced infinitely many universes, and they may all be different. So we may not need our 17 laws. That's just subjective to our universe.
Okay. So super law. Is this like, so it's more like a multiverse model? Because I mean, an eternal universe would sooner raise up.
That's the all-powerful part, the infinite all-powerful part.
It has the power to enact infinitely many things. You're saying it not just has the power, but it actually exerts that power, and it enacts infinitely many things?
That's one of the possibilities. There are just infinitely many universes, and those are all incorporated into naturalistic pantheism. Or maybe it's just one universe, which is, in fact, necessary. That's another possibility. There are infinitely many possibilities of the way it could be.
Okay. Well, maybe we can start dividing these off and providing problems with each notion. I mean, if you're wanting to forward an idea where you have an infinity of alternative universes, you run into some pretty famous egocentric predicaments, right? Are you familiar with these?
I believe so. Which would you like to give me an example?
Well, I mean, you run in so the measure problem, right? You run into problem doing probability. So like um, you could have just popped into existence right now because there are infinitely many universes where you just pop into existence, having the beliefs that you have right now, and in fact, um, you just popped into existence, and everything you believe about the past is false, and you can't say that's improbable.
Sure, but as long as I don't make any claims about metaphysics, I don't have to care.
Well, it would. I would think you'd care as an individual wanting to believe that he holds to rational beliefs. Presumably, you think it's false, and you think that you're rational in believing it's false. That you just popped into existence, and really all of your, virtually all of your beliefs, aside from "I exist," are false.
Oh, let me take it this way. I am right now holding a bottle of water that is full of water, and if I drink it, I will no longer be thirsty. If I was created 5 minutes ago, that is still true. If I was created 5 million years ago, it's still true. So I don't actually have to care whether or not I was created 5 minutes ago or 5 million years ago. It makes no difference to apparent reality at all.
Well, there's an infinitely many universes where you just came into existence 5 seconds ago, and you're going to pop out of existence. You're going to cease to exist in a millisecond. Okay. Do you see a problem with that consequence to the worldview that you're advocating here?
No, because as long as I don't make any claims about metaphysics, I don't care. Like, for example, as long as I'm not claiming I'm absolutely certain I'm not in that universe, well, then I don't care.
Well, no. I mean, uh, I want to close off this possibility. You're talking about this naturalistic pantheism, and you want to leave open within naturalistic pantheism this possibility. And I'm saying, man, if you want to be a rational agent, you better close off this possibility. You better say that it can't enact this particular, or it isn't, at least, it isn't enacting this particular infinity. Because if you want to say that that's a real hypothesis, then you're going to have to deal with the possibility that you're in a situation where you just popped into existence and you'll cease to exist 3 seconds or a millisecond from now.
All right, let me ask you, how does theism solve that problem? We could be in a universe where God creates people into an existence and then going to destroy them in a millisecond later. How do you solve the problem?
I appeal to the definition of God.
Then I can add that definition to pantheism and just as a super law that we haven't discovered yet.
Okay, well, let's try that, because I don't think you can. So if I want to say that God is all good, and all good gets cashed out in terms of moral awareness and things of that sort, you're going to get an eternal universe, so to speak, that's conscious, and that contradicts how you wanted to define it.
I could just say there is a super law of nature that forces conscious beings to exist throughout a lifespan or something. Just completely arbitrary. I can make up infinitely many ways to explain this away.
So, well, in that case, we're going to repeat the question. So if you want to, you're saying that, hey, here's another possibility, but that possibility doesn't close off what you defined earlier as an alternative possibility, namely the possibility that it doesn't have that feature. And in fact, it just enacts infinitely many things. Now, if you want to define a new universe, okay, so we falsified the old one where we were about to, and you decided, okay, I'm gonna sharpen it a little bit. Now you're closing off a lot by redefining the universe, which is fine. You can do that, but I want us to be aware that you changed hypotheses in doing so.
Well, again, I'm just copying your answer. So if you say that you're going to believe that the theistic universe is not one where this occurs, I can just take your answer and apply it to pantheism. That's all I'm doing. So,
well, it's great. Okay. I'm not saying you can't do that, but I am saying that it's a brand new hypothesis at this point. The other one is effectively falsified because it ran into this other problem. So you're making your hypothesis more like my hypothesis in order for your hypothesis to survive. Just fine. I'm okay with that. In fact, I want you to keep doing that, and we're going to keep that project up. And you're going to get closer and closer to God. That's my whole project. Okay?
Yep. But that's my point, is that I can continue to do that ad infinitum without ever adding consciousness. You can just do it with an eternal, all-powerful universe and just be done. No consciousness.
Okay, let's see if we can do that. So because you've already added in something. What did we just add? That's something that it's
a super law that prevents consciousnesses from being popping in and out of existence.
Okay, prevents consciousnesses. And and as we continue going, by the way, are you aware of what adding complexity to an hypothesis does to its prior probability?
Yep, but I'm pretty sure I can still keep it under an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving being, because I can just entail every one of these additions into the all-powerful nature and just have it maintain the same complexity.
No. I mean, in this situation, you already had it. I mean, all powerful. We got rid of that, right? That was vague. We said it can enact infinitely many things, right?
Yeah, which would include the super law that prevents consciousnesses from coming in and out of existence. So that is entailed in the powerness of its whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it all powerful because it's easy.
Okay. When you say that the eternal universe can enact infinitely many things, including a super law, you're saying that the super law is not inherently part of the eternal universe?
It may be, it may not be. It's totally either way. It makes no difference. Whichever one you would say for theism. Does God do it intentionally? If so, it's a part of him. If he doesn't, then it's not a part of him. Same answer for theism. Whatever you say for theism, copy and paste.
If we try to copy and paste it, you do run into a prior probability issue. We're gonna analyze both of them. Let's first look at eternal universe. Well, you can see this firsthand. Eternal universe enacts super law, and then the second one is the super law necessary to eternal universe hypothesis. Okay, I don't know which one of these you think better mirrors God, but let's look at them one at a time. Okay, so if an eternal universe enacts a super law, are you wanting to say that there's a super law that basically determines the super laws?
Well, again, I don't actually believe in any of this. I'm essentially just asking you, what do you believe? And I'm just going to copy that answer. So I don't actually believe in any of this.
And what I'm saying is you can't do that. You can say you can copy it, but when you actually analyze and attempt to copy it, it's not going to work out. And so we're in the process of analyzing to see if you can actually pull this off. And so now I want to ask, let's think about it. Give me the specifics on what you're trying to copy. I want to cover the terrain. I don't know how to use a copy of God in this case. I don't think you can do it.
So you said you reject the possibility that there's a God that could create us and then destroy us a second later because of something about God's nature, right?
It's not that it's philosophically impossible, but it is incredibly improbable, right?
Because of something about God's nature?
Right.
Okay, so there's something about naturalistic pantheism's nature that has the same effect.
Okay, then let me be specific. God, on my understanding, how I define God, which is pretty traditional, is that God is the most worship-worthy being. So God is all good, among other things. I understand that to include valuing, for instance, love, right? Valuing free will, or will in general. And I think we can see, evidently enough, how a world where you have moral agents that are in an environment where they can make moral choice, can determine who they are and influence others for good or for ill based on that. They can grow. They can make a difference for others, a moral difference. They can be in morally significant relationships and so forth. This is a great good. This is the kind of thing that fits very well on the hypothesis of theism. So if you find yourself in a world where all this stuff exists, it's a world that's not too surprising, just given those features, if theism is true. And so you can see why that kind of world fits better than this completely senseless world where things are, including consciousnesses, are popping into and out of existence, which would be at least not as valuable, but probably harbor quite a bit of disvalue.
Okay.
So just it's that falls out of God's goodness, God's being personal, the goodness of personhood, and and God's valuing love and so forth.
You added a couple things there. Let's just start with there's this objective moral property of God. Is that objective moral property something God created, or is it a part of God?
I think it's a part of God.
Okay, so there is an objective moral super law that is a part of naturalistic pantheism.
Objective moral super law, part of pantheism. Okay, and is this grounded in anything, or is it just sort of randomly there?
Is it grounded in God? Is God's morality grounded in God?
I think God's morality is grounded in necessity.
Okay, then the moral super law is grounded in necessity.
Okay. So, and is the moral law that you're talking about, is it essentially a duplicate of the law that we traditionally want to attribute to God?
You mean like the Ten Commandments, the specific laws?
Well, I mean, more what I described earlier, like valuing love and so forth.
No, I would say it can be anything I want it to be.
Well, if it's anything you want it to be, well, you might need to define it out, because it's going to have to be something that makes it less likely for things to pop into and out of existence based on, and you'd have to say something about the universe being inclined to produce something that maximizes the moral law. So you'd have to.
You said the universe produced this moral law, but I don't think God didn't produce it, right? It's a part of his nature, right?
No, it didn't produce the moral law, but it produced the universe and what's inside of it. So what you want, just backing up, what I have is a hypothesis of a foundational God who creates, and given the nature of God, we can see straightforwardly why the kind of universe that would come about on theism, that would be created, would be compatible with that moral law that's inherent in God's nature. You're going to have a harder time with that story unless your fundamental thing, universe, is conscious and can reason. Because even if there is some higher moral law, there's no reason why that would affect what kind of universe comes about in terms of its physical constituents.
I can just say the same thing you did, that there is this naturalistic pantheistic universe that creates universes, and it has this moral law that causes them to come about in a way that is conducive to moral beings or something.
I mean, you're saying it causes, but there's a disconnect there. So you've got your super law, you've got your, or I should say your laws of morality, right? You're wanting to say that these are just sort of, yeah, there's a lot of vagueness there, but you've got some laws of morality somehow, and then you have a universe or a universe producing mechanism, some super law that yields a universe or universes. Do you want to say that the super law yields universes that maximize the flourishing of the values that are what's the word? The values that are or it just maximizes value in general accordance to what's good and bad. So if you say that love is good, you want to say that your natural law is just inclined to produce universes which yield love. Is that the idea?
Something like that, but I wouldn't say maximizes. I don't think good is maximized.
Okay.
There's lots of evil.
Okay, then well, I mean, so theists, you want to mirror theism.
I don't have to mirror it exactly. I just have to mirror it enough to show that the same basic arguments can be indicative of multiple conclusions.
Yeah, I'm just saying, for what it's worth, you can go ahead and mirror theism here anyways, because if I have a response on my end, then I can't use it against you. So you don't have to worry about fending off that part for whatever it's worth. But okay, modify it how you want. The idea is you have some principle or some super law that is somehow inclined to produce value. where value is love and some of these other things that are valuable, including moral agents. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
But we
So-
may disagree about what value is.
Okay. But either way, if we take this feature away from your universe, that your universe runs into a big problem. Can we agree on that?
I'm not sure. I don't follow.
If your universe does not have this godlike feature, you quickly run into this problem of this egocentric predicament we outlined earlier.
Does the same problem exist in theism if you get rid of the moral property of God?
Yeah, it does. If you get rid of the moral property you've got, absolutely.
Then I would agree.
Okay, excellent. So, but I mean, I'm just taking the small victories as they come, or what I perceive to be small victories. Is in order to avoid problems, we're having to get more and more godlike again.
But yeah, the only thing I think we don't need is the consciousness part. Like, I agree there has to be something that is at least eternal and exists forever for something to exist at all. So there are certain properties of God that I do agree must exist.
So one thing we'll want to come back to here. Let's see, can the universe plausibly produce value, love, etc., simply because of a
Super law.
super law that says love is good without rationality?
I mean, I don't know if it says anything, but yeah, essentially.
Yeah, so I'm gonna. That's something to tease out, because I think that we'll find.
Well, did you want me to just answer that right now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So let me read it off to you again. Can the
I-
universe plausibly produce value simply because of a super law that says love is good without that universe having rationality?
Morality can be an emergent property, kind of like how oceans are emergent property. Water does not have the intrinsic property of ocean, but if you add enough water molecules together, you get an ocean. So the moral super law value may not be an intrinsic property of the moral super law, but it is a result from interactions with the moral super law and conscious beings or something like that.
Say that last part again. The super law what?
Value may not be intrinsically a part of the super law, but may be an emergent property between interactions between the super law and conscious beings or something like that.
If it's emergent, then it's not going to play a role in what universe gets created, because it's emergent.
Just the value part is emergent, but the moral super law exists intrinsically.
Okay, I mean, even theists in that kind of sense can say that the value is emergent because it wasn't there at the, at the first moments of the Big Bang, if that's
Sure.
what you mean by emergent. Okay. But well, then that doesn't. I'm not seeing it how that answers our question. So here's the question again: can the universe plausibly produce value, even if emergently over time? Can the universe plausibly produce value, love, etc., simply because of a super law that says love is good, without the universe having rationality?
I don't understand how the emergent property doesn't answer that question.
I'm missing how it does. I'm missing because I'm already granting that it can emerge. Well, here, okay, maybe this is what you're missing, is that there are infinitely many alternative possible universes where that love does not emerge, right? The value does not emerge. So, including the universes we were talking before, where things just, you pop out of existence as soon as you pop into existence with like terrible false beliefs and so forth.
Well,
those are all things that can be produced. Go ahead.
if the moral law is intrinsic, then all universes would produce value.
What I mean, if a universe big bangs and collapses in a picosecond, if there's any value in that universe, it's very little, right?
Yes, but because of the moral super law, there are no universes that are like that because the moral super law causes the universe to be life permitting.
Life permitting or productive of value.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and is the idea, I guess, that um, the So the moral super law is a law that, let's just state it. The law produces. How would we frame the law? Like, what would precisely the law be if we just like put it in a proposition?
What would your answer be for the theistic God?
I think that we'd approach it differently because I'm thinking that God, being all good himself, being all loving, being um, all all knowing, and having all of these properties, can lead to predictions about God's values and what God would want. I don't know if you can use that for the super law idea.
I don't quite follow your reasoning there, because I think it's just as plausible you can imagine an evil God, and there's no reason to assume that your definition of God is any more likely than the evil God definition.
Well, that's a big change in topics. Obviously, you see that too, right?
Yeah, but I was just trying to respond because you said that you think that the theist definition of a God makes predictions in some way and has a higher probability in some sense, whereas I see absolutely no difference. I don't see why you would see that is more likely.
You don't see you don't see why a universe that produces more value is more like, or that produces more good is more likely on the hypothesis that a good God exists.
Yeah, you could say the inverse. You could say that there's actually just an absolute evil standard, and that good is simply the privation of evil.
Just so you know, like when Stephen Law uses his evil God stuff, he's using it in an attempt to fend off an objection to the problem of evil, right?
I'm not Stephen Law.
Okay, I just want okay, just so tell me again what's going on here, because in my mind, if you have at the foundation of reality, an all good foundation, a maximally valuable thing, which as I analyze value, is plausibly an all good, all knowing, all powerful person. As I try to think, what's more worship worthy than that? Like that's pretty much something that I'm hitting into. That's the wall that I hit into. I arrive at that gist of an idea, and that's what we wanted to call God. If that kind of thing exists, then it far more natural, something that would be far more expected to exist and be produced, is a world with agents that resemble God in some of these ways than this chaotic world. So you can see how on the theistic hypothesis, this very elegant, it's simple in the sense it's just the most worship-worthy being, yields a much higher likelihood than would otherwise be for a world that has this kind of value. What are you doing to mirror that in this competing hypothesis?
I would just say the most worship-worthy law and disagree about what worship-worthy means. Or I could do the inverse and say there's an evil God with the most unworship-worthy law, and since there's both good and evil in the world, that the good is just a privation of that, just as how evil would be a privation of the good.
Hold on, you're going way too fast. Can you say that second one very slowly?
There could be, instead of there being an worship-worthy being, there could be a unworship-worthy being, the most unworship-worthy being, and that good is the privation of evil, and that is just as likely to produce the same kind of universe.
Produce this universe. Okay, and going back to okay, so those are two parts. When you say the most worship-worthy law, can you help me understand that? Because I mean, you can understand the idea of a most worship-worthy being personal and all good and all loving.
Well, not exactly. I don't really understand what you mean by that. That seems very vague and arbitrary to me.
Your intuitions might clash with most people on that issue. Then, if we want to think about a most worship-worthy being or entity, typically what I think a lot of people will say, that persons are more valuable than non-persons. So personhood is something, of highest value. Love is of highest value. Truth and honesty, high value.
Well, I don't see worshiping in any sense correlates to value at all. So I don't think we should worship anyone of any quality at all, ever.
if that's going to be a stumbling block for you, then we'll use great, most valuable, greatest instead.
Or just can we just go with best or most moral or something?
Not
Epitome
most,
of morality?
not most moral, but best is. I think best should be fine. Yeah, I'm
Okay,
okay
can we
with
go
that.
with epitome of morality? Is that reasonable?
No, because that's too ad hoc from what I was wanting to do. I would say the greatest possible being is canonical language or pretty traditional language in philosophy.
Okay, then I would go with greatest possible pantheism.
I don't. We might want to drop pantheism because I have no idea what that is. I've never been able to figure it out.
Okay, so by naturalistic pantheism, I just mean eternal, all-powerful universe. That's
And so you
just
just mean greatest possible universe.
just an eternal, all-powerful universe that has this moral super law.
Greatest possible universe with this moral super law.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is what and before we were kind of caught on what is the most worship-worthy law. So this moral super law, this dictates what's valuable and not valuable. Like love is valuable. It just like is a conjunction of all these. What exactly is super law?
I have no idea. How does it work for theism?
On theism, kind of like I was saying before, if you have this greatest possible being, and you can make the argument that the greatest possible being is a person, this the locus of value in terms of being love and honesty, and they're at their maximal level. If you conjoin that all together, whether or not you want to say it's worship worthy, that greatest thing, what Plato called the good, then you have, at least if it's rational, there are certain things that would derivatively be valued. So if this thing is all loving and all rational, then it would see reason to bring about a world with other good things.
All right, what are these? What is this property of lovingness? Is this is like a thing, a part of God, a property of God in some way?
Yeah, it's a property of God. Yeah.
So I just say the same thing, that there is this love thing, which is a property of the greatest possible universe.
You can guess my response to that, right?
Go for it. What is it?
Well, I mean, love is a conscious property, right? I mean, so it doesn't make sense to talk about a loving universe if the universe isn't conscious or personal at all.
I can say the love part that we experience is an emergent property of something more fundamental, which is a part of the all greatest possible universe.
Okay, so you have a universe, and it's not, and you want to say that it's not essentially loving, because the lovingness temporally emergent.
Yeah, the lovingness is just our subjective experience of this much deeper thing, which we can't explain and we can't understand or comprehend.
That confused. So the lovingness only shows up when human perceivers arrive.
I have no idea. It's just when human perceivers arrive, we experience lovingness, but we don't experience it to its fullest or greatest extent. And its fullest or greatest extent is embodied in the greatest possible universe.
So are you saying that love isn't fundamentally personal? When we actually understand the true nature of love, we're going to find out that it has nothing to do with person.
The interactions with personhood could be emergent, yes.
No, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if we can find out in the future that, hey, we've just sort of kind of like the mice, the blind mice on the elephant. We're picking out like this little small piece and calling it love. But when we fully understand love, we're going to find out that it's not actually relevant to personhood.
Sure, it's a possibility. Or it could be that it is relevant to personhood, and it's only because personhood is emergent that it affects persons. It's another possibility. There's a bunch of different possibilities there. I'm just making stuff up. It's not really that significant.
Well, a problem I see is that, I think that that's just analytically demonstrably false. I think love, we can just see that love is grounded in, or at least requires notions of personhood.
I can
It's,
love things that aren't persons.
yeah, but the lover is a person,
Sure,
okay, and necessarily so. It's
sure.
persons that love. So
So,
if
so
love is fundamental in the way that we're talking about, we're requiring personhood.
it's like sight. Their light. Light exists in the universe before anybody existed to see it. So there could be some property of this greater lovingness, and are we only existed to experience it once we came into existence? So it's already there, and we can discover it in the future that it was already there, and we just experience it, kind of like how we experience light or sight or senses.
Just so I understand, when you talk about light, are you talking about photons, or are you talking about the
Our
phenomenology?
Yeah, our eyesight. We only experience the things that have already existed there. So love is some property of the universe that isn't a person, and it just exists as a fundamental property of the universe that we just haven't discovered yet, and it's fundamental. So yeah, love is not necessarily personal.
But I mean, you're talking about, when you say light, you're talking about this qualia, this qualitative phenomenological state of experience, right?
Yeah, just we experience something that's already there.
Okay. And if you want to talk about this being fundamental, I mean, I'm not saying they're absolutely the same, but even that, if you're talking about an experience, a state of experience, you once again have an experiencer. So that would fundamentally require something like a person as well. An
Just
experience.
to experience it, it can still exist independent of the experience.
The photons could, but you didn't want to talk about the photons. You wanted to talk about the experience.
Yeah, so we have the experience of love, but the love itself exists like the photons, independent of the persons.
We have an experience of love, but the love exists independently. So I don't. I think that's incoherent. I don't know what that means because love is definitionally going to involve persons. Definitionally.
Well, that's just because that's all we know about it so far. We can define something in a certain way, but that has no correlation to that it is actually what it is.
I don't think you're going to convince me on that one. Okay, so I put a mark there. And then this, going back to light, not the photons, but the experience. Was that a separate issue?
Well, I think I just answered your question incorrectly because I misunderstood it.
Okay. So just kind of putting this into context, I'm thinking that at the bottom of reality, we have something that very naturally will yield something like a life-permitting universe with value like this. So it's not, I don't want to say it's on par with a prediction, but it's a very natural kind of thing that was not surprising that it exists. And we wanted to see, hey, can we mirror this on a naturalistic worldview? Let's do our best and think about it. And I see problems. The problem that I see is that any attempts to try to create a surrogate for a perfect loving foundation to reality either will contradict the very notions like love that were supposed to yield our observation, or would be something that could not be expected to produce the observation at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it seems to me that you're using an anthropomorphization. You're saying, well, love is defined as something intrinsically personal, therefore it must be intrinsically personal. And that seems like just an assumption on your part. We can say love is not intrinsically personal, and the love that we feel is an emergent property from some more fundamental thing. And there doesn't seem to be any logical contradiction there.
Okay, love that we feel. I mean, we're talking about what's valuable, right? That's what we ultimately want to get to.
Sure.
Is value, and we certainly have this notion that love is valuable, and the notion of love that we have, it seems like you can't divorce it from our understanding from personhood. And if you want to talk about the possibility of divorcing love from personhood, I think you'll have a hard time convincing anyone. I mean, you want to say it's possible. I think you'll have a hard time convincing people that it's even possible. But at the very least, you're going to have a hard time convincing people that it's plausible.
Well, let me give you, so I say objective morality, like the objective moral standard. This is my model, a separate topic a little bit, but the best of all possible worlds for all possible wills is a one where each being has sovereignty over itself and total freedom to achieve its will. Now, if a rock falls on my leg, I would consider that immoral because it is an involuntary imposition of my will. There's no agent involved. No one pushed the rock, just nature, the rock fell on my leg. I consider that immoral.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say the opposite is true, that I can experience morality from nature giving me what I want, even if it wasn't intentional. So I see no requirement for intentionality or volition in any of these moral topics or love or any of that stuff. You don't need it.
Okay, so you want to say maybe we're in this reality, the best of all possible realities, the best of all possible worlds.
We're in a world that's immoral, but that would just be the end point of what morality would look like.
Okay, so ideally, the world would be such that every being has full sovereignty over itself.
Yeah. And that has nothing to do with personhood. You don't need a person for that. It's just, that's the law.
Okay. Let's work with that. Let's go ahead and not object to it. It would be, here would be my challenge is, how do you get something fundamental? I mean, maybe you can just define it. You just you just specify it as in the beginning, there is a thing, a fundamental thing that kind of like my, cosmological constant God, a fundamental thing that yields or that doesn't improbably, a thing it is not improbable that thing would yield a world where each being has sovereignty over itself. Okay, let me read this to you. Here, maybe the hypothesis is that there's a fundamental creative thing or universe, creative thing or universe, maybe segment of the universe. Segment of the universe. So there's a fundamental thing or segment of the universe for which it's not improbable that that thing where each being has sovereignty over itself. Something maybe?
Sure, let's go with that.
Okay, I mean, not necessarily like creative. Let's be less anthropomorphic. A fundamental, productive thing. Now, I should point out that this wouldn't be the universe itself. This would be a segment of the universe that grounds other segments. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And there would be a transition at some point between this this segment that is productive of the rest of the segment, and you're in the realm of a beginning for whatever it's worth. Is that a problem?
No, it's like a multiverse. It creates a whole bunch of different universes all the time, or that's one of the possibilities.
Okay, yeah. Yes, but it okay. Okay, good. Okay. So you have this fundamental thing. Maybe it's this metaverse itself, and if you have this thing, if it exists, then it's not improbable that this thing would yield a world where each being has sovereignty over itself. Is that the gist?
Well, the argument is that it would yield a world like ours. And
yeah, and then the idea is being has sovereignty over itself, and that would yield at least it's not improbable that that would yield a world like ours.
Well, the point of that definition is to show that morality isn't contingent on personhood.
Well, what we need is, whether you want to call it morality or not, something that would naturally yield a world like ours. And if you want to define that as sovereignty, something that would yield a world where each being has sovereignty over itself, if that's how you want to define it, then we'd need to talk about whether this world fits well with that definition of what it would yield.
That definition was just to show that you can have morality without personhood. So we can have a love law that has no personhood. That's just a fundamental part of the universe. That was the only reason I had that. That wasn't actually arguing for a universe like
that. My understanding is that we're trying to produce an alternative foundation, essentially, that will yield a life-permitting universe. And at the same time isn't going to run us into egocentric predicaments, right?
Yes. So we have naturalistic pantheism, which is an eternal, all-powerful universe that has a moral super law in it, and it has some quality like the law I described, in which case morality and love are not intrinsic to personhood.
Oh man, there's so much to untie there. I mean, so again, we don't want to say all powerful, right?
If you don't mind, can I just keep using that because it's easier for me to remember? I'm more familiar with it. It just means it can generate infinitely many laws or universes or whatever. Same thing it means for God, just without the personhood. It just has infinite energy, if you want to put it that way.
Okay, and in terms of, so it has, now is it equally disposed to create any one of those worlds?
Based on the super law, yes. It's disposed based on the moral super law to create life-permitting universes.
I mean, because that would, just to back up, I mean, you have the sort of the canonical substances, powers, liabilities approach to at least natural laws, but I mean, you can co-opt it for this, where you want to say you have something and some substance or whatever, it has both liabilities and powers. That is to say, it has certain things it can do, and then certain liabilities to do it. So, an electron, we can think of an electron, and there are certain things an electron can do, and there are certain dispositions it has to exert that ability and actually do it. Usually it's deterministic, but sometimes it's probabilistic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would tie in because I don't know how that applies to theism.
Well, I can explain that, but in this case, when we're saying that something is all powerful, I can understand it on this model where it's sort of quote unquote capable of doing anything, but it is you want to be careful about saying it's equally liable to do all the whatever option that it has that comes to mind, so to speak.
Sure,
because that runs you into egocentric predicaments. And so you want to say that, sure, it has all power, but it's disposed to act in a particular way or to produce in a particular way.
A certain kind of outcome rather than the others.
Yeah, and it can be probabilistic. And you want to say it's at least more probable that it would produce a universe that's life-permitting, and at least eventually, and that doesn't simultaneously run you into egocentric predicaments, right?
Yep. And so we have this moral super law that makes life-permitting universes more likely under this universe if it exists.
Yeah, I think moral super law might be tripping us up. I think it's better for this hypothesis, as we flesh out, you tell me if I'm wrong, to say it's all powerful in the sense that we just described. So it's foundational, it's necessary, it's all powerful, but it's disposed to act in certain ways and not in other ways.
Sure.
Okay, and those dispositions can be cashed out in terms of things like law. So like it's let's see here. Like let's start thinking of some laws that we can sort of tuck into this fundamental.
Can we just go with the cosmological constant? How about that one?
Okay, so kind of like my example earlier.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So in this case, I mean, I don't know if it would be moral at that point, but whatever, it doesn't have to be. as long as it gets us our result. So it's disposed to produce a, a universe, not necessarily one, but at least a universe with a cosmological constant that's fine-tuned to 1 part 10 to the 120th. For life, I guess. I mean, that it is fundamental. That's fixed to a notion of life permitting this, because
Sure.
that's what the 1 in 120 refers to. Okay, and of course that pushes the improbability right back onto this. I mean, this is a very complex, unpredictable disposition, right? I mean, of all the possible dispositions it could have, for it to have something so specific as a disposition to reference a cosmological constant, and particularly to fix onto this very particular value, what we've introduced into the fundamental entity, something unfathomably improbable. Is that fair to say?
I don't think so. I see it as quite simple. It only has so far 3 properties, and this is just what it happens to be dispositioned to do. It's part of its nature.
So the number of properties that it has is one way, or one factor, in the simplicity of the entity, but it's not the only one, because properties themselves can be complex, and you can have a really nasty complex property that would introduce into your entity. Terrible complexity. One property can be stupid complex, and that would help nothing. And I analyze complexity here in essentially number of ways that it could go wrong. That is to say, number of ways that it could fail to obtain. So in this case, we're saying that the thing that obtains is a cosmological constant that's fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. Well, given a range of at least 10 to the 120, that's already a 1 in 10 to the 120th improbability that's introduced into it already. But then, of all the possible kinds of laws that could be built into it, in this case, it's a law about a cosmological constant, which makes use of notions like space. We already saw that it makes use of the notion of life, right? Because that's what it is. It's fine-tuned to life. That's what the 1 in 10 to the 120 power is making reference to.
Sure.
So I see us introducing a wildly complex element into this fundamental entity that would make it as improbable as that, God who wants to fine-tune things to 1 in 10 to the 120th power.
I would say
Go ahead.
I would say that it's a necessity that it would always choose this one instance, and every universe it creates will always have this exact setting because of the properties in it.
Yeah,
properties of the naturalistic pantheism.
I took that for granted, absolutely.
Okay.
But here's the thing: is when you say that. Okay, backing up. When you say that it's necessary, you trying to say it's not epistemically improbable?
I'm not sure.
You know the difference between epistemic and metaphysical?
Epistemic and ontological, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Epistemic is knowledge, and ontological is what is.
Yeah. When you're dealing with Bayesian probability, you're of course dealing with epistemology, right?
Yeah.
So if we're talking about a fundamental thing, unless you can see that it's necessary, it's not going to affect the epistemic probability. So you can talk about, hey, there's a necessary God who necessarily is disposed to fine-tune the universe to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. You might hope, hey, because I'm putting the word necessary in front of it, we're taking away all of that improbability. The probability becomes 1. But that's to confuse epistemic probability with or possibility with ontological.
And how is that different from what you're doing with theism?
Sorry, you cut out.
How is that different from what you're doing with the theistic God?
Because I'm not even mentioning God's necessity to get the job done here.
So we have.
Yeah, I go ahead.
So we have this theistic God who is going to likely create a life-permitting universe for some reason. Is that right?
Well, we've specified the reason, right? And it's the specification of the reason and the contrasting of our reasons that highlights the difference between the hypotheses, with one being more simple than the other.
So in the theistic worldview, the reason is the moral loveness, and in the pantheistic, it's the impersonal loveness. So I don't see any difference.
Well, originally, are we dropping the cosmological constant version for now?
Well, that's
Because
just
we
a
were
result of the love. Is the lovingness results in life-permitting universes, and this is one of the contingencies on a life-permitting universe.
no. A second ago, you were talking about a second version of what you were proposing, and on this second version, you talked about a God that necessarily is just disposed to. I mean, it makes no reference to love; it doesn't need it. It's just disposed to fine-tune the universe to one part and to one, or the cosmological constant.
Oh, that's my apologies. I was just using that colloquially. I meant I was still referring to the love law that causes the universe to be likely to produce this kind of thing. I misspoke. That was my fault.
Okay, no worries. But that brings me back to my earlier confusion: is how love can connect to what universe would be produced.
So my definition of morality, which is
No,
love,
not
is
morality.
entailed.
Love here.
So love is entailed in morality in some sense. They're related, right?
How? Show me.
Well, are they not related? I thought they were.
I think they are, but I actually don't think that love is entailed in morality as you define morality.
Yeah, and I define morality differently than you do. The way I define morality does not entail persons, and so that's where we have a difference.
Right. And so if love isn't entailed in your definition of morality, which
No.
is what we call, go ahead.
Love is entailed in my definition of morality. I just have morality is not required or contingent on persons. That's the only difference.
Okay, say that again.
Morality is not contingent on persons. Love is still a part of morality.
Morality, as I recall you saying, is that you have. I mean, this is so tricky. We're getting our words mixed up here, because this is not morality. This is just the best world where each being has sovereignty over itself, right?
But remember, that was just an example I was using to try and show here is one case where we can have morality and love without personhood. That was the purpose of that example.
So if you had a world where each being didn't have sovereignty over itself, it wouldn't have morality?
It would have morality. That would be the epitome of morality. You would still have moral actions.
Okay, so
you would still... What?
What you want to say, state of affairs, right?
What? You cut out there.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the epitome of morality, what you're saying is the most valuable kind of state of affairs.
I'm just saying the ontology, that is what morality is. That is the quality of morality. It is the property of morality. It is like whatever you think morality is in God, how it relates, it's the same thing. It is just, that just is morality.
I understand. I mean, people don't, at least philosophers I read, rather than the word morality, you can talk about moral values and moral duties. So it'd probably be helpful for us to use those terms. When you talk about morality and you say that, the epitome of morality is each being has sovereignty over itself, I hear it. And what I hear is the most valuable kind of state of affairs. And here we're talking about moral value. The most morally valuable kind of state of affairs is a state where each being has sovereignty over itself. Is that fair?
I think so.
The most morally valuable kind of state of affairs is one where each being has sovereignty over itself. And that ideally will fall out of a more foundational moral system. And with that moral system, what you can predict is that the most valuable state of affairs is where each being has sovereignty over itself. So your moral system would be something like affirming the value of will, of personal will.
Yes.
So personal will is of highest value.
Yes.
Personal will is of highest value. Do you believe, and we're proposing, I mean, some kind of objective value, obviously, because it's built into the universe. Now, here's something tricky too. When you say value, as in moral value, is this a primitive for you?
I have no idea. How does it work for theism?
Okay. I mean, on theism, yeah, I think that it's primitive. I do, but the thing is as
So moral value is like a property of God.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are different models here, but as I see value, I see it as something that you can't disconnect from a valuer. It value is the way that something is held by a cognizer. A value. Something is valuable to persons. I'm trying to understand a notion of value that doesn't make use of that.
So again, my model of morality and value requires absolutely no personhood. It's just a principle that is instantiated by the properties of this universe.
Well,
And it affects persons.
Yeah, it affects persons. I hear you there. I'm wondering if using the word value is actually just corrupting the model at this point. I don't know what work it's doing. It's rather than talking about value, right? Because we can see how value on a commonsensical level connects to personhood, where persons value things and they'll act in response to their values and what they value. It connects to desires or at least rational desires and so forth. Connecting it in your model is hard to understand. I think to get the conclusion you want, you're just going to talk very simply about a universe, or a fundamental segment of the universe that has a high probability of producing a world like this. I don't when you appeal to value, because it's not connecting up with any notion that I'm aware of, I can't use it in my understanding, and it can't help reduce tension in my understanding of the prior probability of your model. It's kind of like, yeah, you're using the word value, but for me, it's like ooga booga dooga.
Yeah, we have different definitions of morality, and based on my definition of morality, it doesn't require personhood. Now, I may not be able to communicate this to you, but based on my definition of morality, it is clearly possible to have a universe that has this moral property that makes a life-permitting universe likely.
I understand that. I heard that, but at the bottom of your model, when we're having your fundamental entity, and it's got all power, it can do anything. Okay, it's a fundamental segment of reality, I guess. And one thing that's true, maybe that's included, is this truth that personal will is of highest value. Okay. Now that sounds very strongly like a kind of like a belief, really, to be straightforward. It sounds like a belief. It's a true proposition, but the very notion of value is connecting it in evaluative judgments in general, connect up to persons.
Sure, but that could just be the way we express the principle. The principle itself could be some deeper thing we just can't understand. So the fact that that's how we express the principle to understand it doesn't necessarily mean that it's intrinsic to persons.
Yeah, I don't know if we can move forward then, because I have two problems with that, which I mentioned or alluded to earlier. The first problem for me is I actually feel like I can see the incoherence of that. I think I've got a strong enough grasp of the notion of value that I'm not going to be able to. I don't know if I'm going to be able to divorce it from belief.
Okay.
And the second challenge is, even if it were possible, the likelihood that it would be true because of how implausible it strikes me, would strongly count against this hypothesis in a way that it wouldn't on theism.
Okay, so here my response would be, I see your definition of a morality or objective morality to be just as incoherent and implausible, and there's no difference between your definition and my definition from a probabilistic standpoint. I see no difference.
Well, I'm not giving a definition of morality at this point.
Well, you said morality and love are contingent on persons in some sense. Is that right?
Yeah, if you're going to make use of that word morality, but I'm not even making use of that word. I'm talking maybe value. I think what you mean is value, not morality in this case, because I am talking about fundamental value.
I see them as synonyms, essentially. But so the point is that you think my model is not coherent as an objective basis of morality or value or whatever. And I think your model is not coherent as a basis of objective morality or value. I don't see any reason to prefer one over the other.
So in what I was calling attention to, and I understand to be incoherent, is this idea of value divorced from any notion of personhood, and love divorced from any notion of personhood. And I think most people hearing that would be like, yeah, I think I agree with what Blake's saying there. I feel like I can see that too.
Okay, and my objection is...
Real quick. I don't think that there's an analogous problem with my understanding of love and value.
So I would see the problem is that you're providing a definition of objective morality, and we have no coherent definition of objective morality. That would be the problem I see with your definition.
I don't think I'm providing a definition of objective morality here. I'm in fact, what's funny is in philosophy, it's notoriously difficult to provide analyses or definitions. Usually they'll try to talk about some essential properties of the concept they're trying to analyze. So I'm not even going to require you to give me a full-blown definition, but hopefully you can give me some leading descriptions that can help me latch on to what you're thinking of. In this case, though, you've given me part of your understanding, and as I hear it, I feel straightforward incoherence, and I don't feel that incoherence in my understanding of value as I list off the sorts of properties that we can use to describe value. These are things that typical philosophers will also throw out, and they seem to all be on the same page that this is a coherent notion. But I don't think that they do that for what you're doing, for what you're saying.
That's because I believe they all say those are subjective value, subjective morality, based on usually evolution in some sense.
No, I'm talking about people working in moral philosophy who believe in objective morality and aren't even theists.
I also believe in objective morality, and I presented my model of objective morality. Now, I see the same incoherence when I look at theist models of objective morality, claiming that morality is grounded in some being, super being, and some, I forget what you said, something about worship, worthy of worship.
Yeah.
That is completely incoherent to me. That makes no sense whatsoever. The fact that something is worthy of worship is just a completely incoherent statement. I can see no criteria that can justify that.
Well, if you sort of conjoin together, Plato's The Good, and you include in this love, and or an entity that perfectly loving, perfectly honest, and so forth. Some entity that has all of this valuable stuff. Personhood, I would say, is valuable as well. But
Well, you just said this value is valuable. Just put value on both sides of the equation. Seems circular to me.
You lost me there. So I think personhood is valuable. I think honesty is valuable. I actually think existence itself has value. Love is valuable. Truth is valuable. Okay. If you can join these together, I want to say that's God is this ultimate ball of value, and for what it's worth, I'm not saying you have to believe this. I actually think that when something bears the property of goodness, it's bearing this property of resembling God. That's just for what it's worth. We don't have to talk about that. Just it might help with a little bit of understanding. But as long as there's this thing that is perfectly loving, perfectly honest, and so forth, and is personal, right? You can see how things like, or derivatively, how you would have moral duties for one, and how other things could be valuable in reflecting it. I guess that's the model, if that's what you were asking for.
And for me, that seems totally arbitrary. Like what this totally perfect. I forget what
Can you hear
else.
me?
Yeah. What did I cut out?
Yeah, no, you're good.
All right.
I
So
mean, nothing in there seems to be like conflicting with common sense notions of value. I guess that's the ultimate point.
common sense isn't evidence that value is intrinsically a part of the universe, or that there is an objective thing. It could be an illusion. There's no common sense isn't evidence of any kind, really.
And common sense isn't
Evidence that there is some super being that is the intrinsic total perfectness.
I mean, if we're latching on to concepts, I mean, if we're really latching on to something objective out there, it seems like what we're latching on to would need to be coherent, right? And I guess I don't know. And I guess for me, what it's boiling down to at the moment, and I'm going to have to head out pretty soon, by the way.
All right.
So another 10 minutes or so. It is, I don't see, or starting out, I see a straightforward incoherence in the idea of love divorced from personhood, and even value divorced from personhood. And I think I can straightforwardly see this, and I think people can see it along with me. I don't see any incoherence in the idea of value on my understanding, or value, in large part, where God is the epitome of value, and value amounts in part to resembling God and God's properties. What do you think about that?
I see an incoherence in your leap from our common sense notions of value to be indicative of some kind of objective. I forget what you said. We're grabbing onto some kind of objective something.
Yeah, latching onto our notion. Yeah.
So I see an incoherence when you try and latch on to a notion of objectivity based on common sense. That's where I see an incoherence.
So if you're wanting to say that there's objective value in the world, right?
Sure.
That's what you're wanting to say. There has to be some connection between you and that value in order for you to be referencing it, right?
Epistemologically, but ontologically, we may not know anything about it.
Sorry?
There could be an ontological value system that we know nothing about, and we can still just talk about the concept. So epistemologically, we need some connection to it, but ontologically, we don't.
Well, so typically what philosophers will want to say is you can apprehend these moral truths through your faculty of reason, right? So it's through your faculty of reason that you're connecting to these things out there. And if it weren't for your faculty of reason, and let's say you had no perception either, there would just be no way of, I mean, even if you came up with something like words and concepts, you wouldn't latch on to this concept of morality. There would be no proper reference history for you to be able to connect to it. Does that make sense?
It seems kind of like an assumption. I mean, we can imagine certain things that with absolutely no correlation to reality.
I think we're talking past each other. So maybe this will help. One famous objection to evolutionary approaches to understanding what's right and wrong is that even if we did, let's say there's no objective morality there, and these are real moral truths. They're like they're part of the furniture of reality. And then you have evolution going on over here. And as things evolve, they have these sort of feelings that we call moral feelings. And, so we might feel and use this sort of language of feeling that murder or that killing an innocent person is wrong. Okay. And we'd feel like it's, in this moral domain. But in that process of evolution, even if we have feelings like that, there's never been any type of connection to what's going on non-physically outside of what's going on in us emotionally. There's no way to connect the two. Evolution just had, molecules bouncing around and produce certain types of feelings in certain types of situations. And whatever's happening there there's no way for it to connect to objective morality out there. They've never come into contact.
Unless it's a super law that interacts in our brains in some sense.
Well, so now you're positing a way for there to be contact, but when you talk about a super law that interacts with our brains, inevitably you're talking about the faculty of reason, in which case you have a way to latch onto it.
Okay.
That's all. I was saying you need a way to latch onto it.
But yeah, but we don't have any evidence of a super law. I'm just making that up. We don't actually need to know of one. We can still talk about the possibility of one without actually knowing of one.
Yeah. So recap for me. Where do you see us right now?
So I see the contradiction in your position between the leap from our common sense notions of morality to some kind of objective morality. I see no connection between those two whatsoever. Just as much as you see no connection between morality and non-personhood.
Okay. And right, you think that maybe as we fully flesh out our understanding of love, or we fully flesh out whatever our understanding of love is latching onto, we'll find out that, hey, it doesn't actually require persons. And the same goes for value. You think that this too can be completely divorced from personhood. And maybe there's nothing evaluative there, or there's no evaluator.
Or there could be a God, or they could just be subjective and there is no objective morality. Any of those are possibilities.
Yeah, you were just wanting to say for this particular model, you were wanting to talk about an objective value that could help you get the kind of universe that you wanted.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool, man. I think that's a
good place to wrap up.
Yeah, yeah. I tell you what, it's fun stuff to think about. I really appreciate it. It's refreshing to have a good conversation, good philosophically sophisticated conversation on the issue. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk with me. I really do appreciate it. It helps me a lot to flesh out my position, and I'd love to talk with you some other time about the other arguments.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm game. Let's do it.
All right. I'll send you an email. We can check our calendars.
All right, man. Sounds good. Take care. Bye.